It's time for another edition of Saturday with Seniors. I'm Kevin Thomas here, and it's brought to you by Eisenhower's Tioga County Harley-Davidson. Eisenhower's, South Mansfield. You need a place to store your bike this winter? Look into that. If you're looking for a new bike, a used bike, parts, accessories, or just a good Christmas gift when Christmas comes, head on down to Eisenhower's Tioga County Harley-Davidson. Thank you for joining us, Lynn Van der Hiel. Hello, how are you, Lynn?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me into your house here. You have a beautiful, beautiful home here in Mansfield, and you told me you're 86 years old.
I am.
So does that mean you were born in what, 1938, 39?
38.
Wow, 1938. Was it Roosevelt, I think, was president then or something like that? I mean,
Maybe.
Probably, all right.
Yeah, probably.
Tell me a little bit about your family's history, because your family is all over Tioga County here.
Right.
And always has been, it seems like. How far back does your family roots go in Tioga County?
Well, we were the 16th family. It was the Eberns family.
Eberns family, okay.
16th family in Tioga County.
When you say 16th, how early on are we talking? 1830s or something?
I should have looked that up, and I didn't. I'm not exactly sure, but maybe it was even in 17 something.
Okay. Yeah, because the courthouse in Wellsboro is 1830, I think. So,
yes,
yeah, I
and
guess
that
it would
was
be.
before that.
Wow, okay.
I do know.
Yeah, Revolutionary War barely over, and they're coming here.
Yes, and actually my great uncles would come into Wellsboro, into the dirt streets.
Mm-hmm. The land
On
office
their
is over there. Yeah.
On their horses, and they would come in to get something to drink.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but then they would get into a fight, and then they would have to stay on the ground. You know, the sheriff would put them out, just have them lay on the ground and take their weapons and all this kind of thing, which sounds really strange.
Sounds like the old Wild West saloon days here.
It was.
Saloon at the salon, yeah.
And then the next day, to pay for any damages they had done,
And large bar bills.
they had to clear the green. So it was my family who helped to
create the
make
green.
The green.
Yeah. Which is actually the geographical center of Wellsboro, not the business center, but the actual center there.
It was.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah, well, it might be kind of neat, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
a bunch of drunks.
Yeah, well, I didn't know the green owes dedication to hard work. We have a lot of statues over there, but we don't have one dedicated to the drunks that helped build it.
No, right.
But times were different then, obviously, I assume. So
They were, the stagecoaches coming in from Philadelphia and people coming in.
How did your family get here? Now, you said stagecoach. Did they take the stagecoach here?
Oh, no. Well, maybe one family did, but the other family, the Eberns family, came up Pine Creek in a canoe and decided that they liked the gorge. They got to the
Pine Creek Gorge, is somewhere above where Morris is now, in that area somewhere.
And then my great-grandfather said, "Oh, guess this is a good place to live." And so they
did.
So they did.
Yes. So they didn't really know where they were going. They just kind of paddled till they found something.
Well, they had a cabin up where their home is, just this little cabin, and that's where they lived.
Is it still there?
Yes, it is, actually.
Wow. This must be an extremely old cabin then.
Well, of course it has been fixed and everything, but now there's a big home there.
Mm-hmm. The house is still there? Have you met the owners?
I met the owners. I don't know if they are the owners now, but I did meet the owners, and they were fixing up the house. And I did meet with people who lived there before. She was actually a very good friend of mine. So I was over there. I went through the house. It was so interesting to go through that house. They had the fireplaces in each room, and to realize that that's the place where my mother was actually born. In that house,
Wow.
And my mother was born in that house, and my mother's mother died at childbirth. So, it was kind of interesting to be in that home. But you ask about the cabin. They have kept the cabin.
That was a house, but it's now what you would call a cabin.
Yeah. It was this tiny little log cabin where they originally lived. And they also made moonshine, and people from Wellsboro would come out to buy their moonshine.
So how do you know all this history? Did somebody document this in your family along the way?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
You're so lucky to have all that. Wow.
Yeah, well, there's a street in Wellsboro called Eberns Street.
Yes, named after your family that was here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of the old streets, you look at really old maps and who owned the homes, there's all those names you see all over the place on there.
You have Eberns Street, and then right up from that, and the next street, right on that corner, my grandfather built that house, and that was a big home.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope I'm telling all this right, but
To the best of your knowledge.
Yes.
So your family, were you born here or
My family then, my mother and father My father, he was an engineer for the highway department, and he got a job in Williamsport. And so they moved to South Williamsport, and I was born.
And 1938 there in South Williamsport. So what are your earliest memories being a kid there? Do you remember your early days of school, elementary school?
I do remember. I didn't particularly like school, but I do remember going to school. I do remember walking to school. We walked to school, and as I remember, they always say, well, oh yeah, well, I walked to school with the snow up to my chin.
Uphill both ways.
Yeah, right. I walked both ways and all this, I can remember a lot of things about school. I remember my third grade teacher was such a wonderful person, and that, I believe, is when I decided, after knowing her, meeting her, having her teach me, I decided to be a teacher, and I never changed. I wish I could tell her.
I was going to say, did you ever get a chance to go back?
No, I wanted to be just like her.
Yep, it's great that you had an idol that you looked up to, that one that was a good role model in this world. We need those.
I wasn't an elementary school teacher, but it was her influence.
Yeah. What else do you remember about school? Did they use the dunce caps and stuff back then?
They did. You stood in the corner. I didn't ever have to do that.
Everybody says they didn't have to.
But,
somebody did.
You got a licking if you were...
The paddle or
something bad. Yeah, a paddle. I know my teacher wrote a note home to my parents about something I did.
That's probably worse than any other.
Boy, I would rather stood in a corner, I think, because it was so different as I think about it. If a teacher called your parents, or if a teacher wrote a note home to your parents, the parents would think that the teacher was absolutely right.
Yeah, there was no innocent until proven guilty.
This thing where the parents would go in and yell at the teacher. I mean, are you kidding? No. I mean, if you got paddled in school, you can bet bottom dollar you were going to get paddled at home. Paddled at home, I say.
Yes.
Paddled.
Okay.
You don't even paddle.
She's showing a paddle here that's a little bigger than his hands are going further out.
You're going to get your dad's belt.
Yeah.
That's what I got. Yeah.
Yeah. The world's changed in that area. Do I dare ask you what your thoughts are of that change?
Sure. I don't think that it's good just to paddle kids. I mean, I was paddled by my mother mostly. She said one summer she had to paddle me every 15 minutes because I was bad. Oh, goodness, I wasn't bad. But she was older. She was 42 when she had me. And I think that she just couldn't, I was lively, of course.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. But anyway, I think that if you can talk to a kid, or if you are aware of what your kids are doing and stop things before something happens and not spend your time yelling at
proactive
kids.
Instead of reactive.
Yes, absolutely. I do believe that kids should be disciplined. But I don't believe in paddling. I believe I don't believe in paddling. And I don't believe in yelling and screaming at your kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's, I think that was kind of waiting for something to happen, then paddling your kid was almost maybe the almost easy way. In the same way now the parents will just give their kid a touchpad or, a movie to watch so that it's the easy way instead of giving kids the attention that they need.
I also think that you said watching a movie. I think the kids should be outside playing, and oh my goodness, I cannot. Well, of course, we didn't have television. There was no going in and watching television. We did have a radio, and I did listen to the radio on Saturday morning. I could, but I was outside from the time I got home from school until when the street lights came on.
Yep, that was a lot of my parents did. Street lights are on, come home.
Yeah.
Or your dad would be yelling your name out, and you could hear it at a quarter mile. Kevin!
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I remember playing with the kids in the neighborhood.
Do you remember the games you played?
Yes, kick the can. I can remember kick the can.
Somebody needs to Google that and bring it back. I've heard of it.
Yeah.
So is there actually a technique in this, or it's just you just kick a can down the street?
Well, you kick the can and people run and hide. Something like hide and seek or something, I think. But we played that and played it and played it. And you're in the middle of a street kicking a can, And,
were there still some horses around then on the street ever, or was it?
No, where I lived, of course, in South Williamsport.
Yeah, Lamar City, so...
But I do have to tell you that our milk, it was hers milk, and it was delivered by horse and wagon. It had 2 horses, I think, and a big white wagon, and the milkman would pull the milk out.
This white hat and everything on, and dressed like,
yes, like you see.
like you would iconically see, I guess you would think. Yeah, the hood man there.
And the milk was in bottles, of course, and it would have cream that would come up,
Because it wasn't homogenized. It would settle to the top, yes.
Oh, it was so good. It was so good.
So you had an ice box too then, probably, I would guess,
We
in the
did
earliest of days.
To begin with, my parents.
So the
And
Iceman
they brought
came
the
too.
Iceman came in, put ice in the back of the refrigerator. Gosh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, my mom was telling me about that. The leather thing over his shoulder and the big tongs, and he'd bring it. She's in like the 3rd-story apartment. He'd come lugging up that big block ice like it was just his job. Yeah.
It was just his job. That's right. I loved horses, and I always wanted a horse. And then after I got married, we had horses. So
It seems like you found a lot of things that you love when you were younger. You found out you wanted to be a teacher in 3rd grade. You found out you loved horses when you were younger, and you follow those dreams, which is great.
yeah.
Were they still doing they weren't doing log drives then in Williamsport. I think that probably ended just before your time. What do you remember about the river?
The river in Williamsport.
Yeah, I mean that's what the log drives. That's what made Williamsport the Millionaire Rows and
it is Millionaire Row, all that. I don't remember the logs.
Yeah, I think they stopped about probably the time you were somewhere in that time period in there.
Probably.
Yeah. Your parents went through the Great Depression. You were born just after the Great Depression. Did they tell you a lot of stories about that, or were they super thrifty from that?
They were very thrifty. Yes. If you have classes, if you would say, poverty, middle, and rich, we were right on the very bottom of middle. I mean, my mother made all my clothes.
And mended your clothes, right, every time they needed it?
Absolutely.
She had a sewing machine. Percentage of houses that had a sewing machine, 100% then?
Yeah. She did mend my socks, by darn. And I had a pair of shoes.
You had one pair of shoes?
I had one pair of shoes. A little later, I had school shoes and
like work
church
shoes? Okay. So when you're doing work or something, you just wore your...
I wore my school shoes unless I was going to church, and then I wore my church shoes. Yeah.
So you went to the cobbler, and for those that don't know, the cobbler's not a dessert. They fix shoes there.
Yeah, that's right. The leather guy.
Yeah.
The shoe man. He was an important person in our lives. We lived in South Williamsport, and because it was right at the end of the war, I remember blackouts, when we had blackouts.
Air raids. You go under the desk in school, they teach you how to do all that stuff, and fallout shelters. And
good grief. And I also remember our home when we had air raids and you had to pull all your blinds down.
Yes. This is so the planes, back then they relied on what they could see to figure out where they were. So if enemy planes are around, you wanted to make sure they couldn't have any landmarks.
That's right.
To recognize. Wow. Was there a siren that went off to tell you that?
Yeah, it was terrible.
When you heard that, were you scared? Or did you just see it as like a fire drill?
No, I was scared. It was really scary. And then you could hear the planes come over. There were planes that came, not enemy planes.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they weren't enemy planes. Probably not flying over South Williamsport, but they would actually do the raid, So the blinds had to be down. You had to have a certain kind of blinds. I do remember that because now that I'm thinking about it, it's really interesting. I remember that the blinds were kind of expensive, but we had to have them.
Because if you turned out the lights, that wasn't good enough. You had to have those.
Good enough. You had to have the blinds down.
Wow, I'd never heard of this.
And you had to have the radio on.
And were you putting on the Williamsport station then, WLYC?
Yes.
Yes.
That's right. Oh my goodness. And
I'm in radio. I know that part.
That's right. I haven't thought of that in so long. We'd have the radio on so that you knew what was going on.
Wow.
It was kind of a scary time.
Was it scary for everybody? Like, were most people in general? Was it a scary time period, or was it?
Well, of course, being a kid, we didn't talk about, oh my gosh, we're at war, things like that. We just went on going to school and playing and doing all those kinds of things, But I do know that when I think back about it, it really did affect our lives because you couldn't eat. I mean,
everything was rationed too.
It was. I have a book I just did in January, and it has rations in it. We, we have kept their books about our life, the room. And my dad, we were talking about the cobbler. We lived in South Williamsport, and he worked in Williamsport. And he walked a mile to work. He came home for lunch because there wasn't enough money.
If not a lunch pail, you're coming home.
walked home. That was another mile, walked back, and walked home. So he walked 4 miles a day to go to work.
Actually, a very healthy lifestyle.
Every day. No
Weather doesn't matter. Rains, whatever, like the old mailman thing.
Yeah, the Market Street Bridge and into his work. So, I have to say that was something I do remember. We could not go anyplace because of the gas rations.
I think it was actually easier talking with other people who have been through this in the rural areas. Like the farmers here had access to food. They could get the fuel because they needed it for their tractors. And talking with people who lived in this area through that, it sounds almost like it didn't affect the rural people nearly as much. And air raids weren't, happening so much you were,
Well, it did. It was happening.
Well, a big city like Williamsport, absolutely. I mean, there was air raids, but it sounds like when we talked to the farmer, what life was like then out there. Do you remember when the war ended? When World War II ended?
I do. And my mother was making me a dress. I remember that. She was on the sewing machine.
And you said she made most of your clothes, so this is nothing unusual.
No, she was doing that. And I was sitting on the stair steps playing with a doll. I remember that. I had one doll. And the sirens were going off. I thought it meant that we were having another air raid. And the sirens were going off. And I remember running to my mother. I don't know why I didn't run downstairs. But anyway, I ran to my mother, who was upstairs because I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. And she said, oh my goodness, and yelled at my father to turn the radio on, I guess. Or he had the radio on. And the war was over.
So the same siren was used just to say, listen to your radio so that you can know this is an announcement. This is not bad news.
This is good. I remember my mother and father were so really happy, and of course they were, and I was just kind of amazed about the whole thing.
Wow, that's great. Little League World Series was then. Did you go to any of the early games?
To the first.
Whoa!
One.
You went to the first Little League World Series?
Yes, it was in Williamsport.
Yep, that was at not where it is now. Actually, Williamsport, not South Williamsport then.
Yeah, it was in Williamsport, and we all sat on. There might have been a little section of old kind of bleachers.
Yeah.
Not fancy ones that have the backs on them, but old bleachers. There might have been a little section, but most of us sat on the dike. Actually, that's where I sat. And I remember my father, at that point, my father drove a girlfriend of mine and me over to the game. We always seemed to fall in love with the pitchers. One pitcher from someplace. That was really a big thing, those games. And
even from the beginning, they had thousands of people or large. I'm sure not like we do now, but I mean that.
Oh, not.
But a huge, big crowd though. I've been to where that first field, it's still there, and Little League plays there. It's not much bigger than the Mansfield fields as far as.
No, it's just a small field.
Yeah.
And there was a dikes there.
Yeah.
And we sat there, and I don't think we paid anything. We just went in, sat down.
And WLYC was about 300 yards away with their tower, and they broadcast those games all the way through. I just love the radio history of that.
Yeah, that was fun. I do remember that. And I do remember one of my friends was an Afro-American girl. There was like two families in South Williamsport, I think. And anyway, she was my friend, and we went together.
So how was...
Sometimes that caused a bit... I remember we went to Stern's store in Williamsport.
I never heard of Stern's. Department store or something?
A department store in Williamsport. And my mother was working there one Christmas to make some money. And we went over. My dad took two of us over there. And I never thought anything about it. We were just kind of around. And then we had to use the restroom. And one of the clerks said that she could not use the restroom with me.
They had a separate restroom for...
And so she had to go way in the back of the store.
And did she just accept that? Was that something that was common, I wonder?
Accept it.
Yeah.
I didn't accept it.
Good for you.
I went back there.
You were progressive for your days there.
There was also a separate fountain for them to drink out of.
I knew in the South. I did not know that was the case here. So you spent time with this person. Did you see people treating her differently constantly, or calling names?
I don't know if it was constant.
I mean, enough that it was going on.
It was going on.
How'd that make you feel?
Angry, as you said. I've always been. I didn't. That wasn't right because she was my friend. I really liked going to her home.
Yep.
You know,
And your parents
I
were
liked her.
supportive of this and all?
Oh, yeah,
And
they didn't think.
nobody was coming up to you saying, what are you doing hanging out with a person of color that's...
No. Now, she might have been really mistreated, you know, but the two of us, we had a good time together.
You really are a good person. 'Cause that was a tough time.
But I do remember the Klansmen. I also went to the first Laurel Festival.
You were at the first Laurel Festival parade too?
Yeah.
Were the Klansmen in the parade on the first Laurel Festival? I know they've marched in Wellsboro.
I think so.
Yeah, parades. Wow.
I think
it's a changing world. Thank God.
Yeah. I just really thought it was just really weird. I probably said so too. And I was probably told to be a little bit more quiet about it.
Being a woman too, women's rights were still a little bit behind, right? I mean, at that time period, women to get a bank account, a checking account, to own a home.
No. You couldn't get a checking account. You couldn't get a card.
You couldn't get a credit card even until like 1980.
Yes, that's right.
The Banking Act, I think, in 80 or
That's
81
right.
will change that. Yeah.
As I said, my mother stayed at home and tried to raise me.
Yeah.
And she ran the vacuum and she did the wash with a
Well, you got to
ringer
also,
washer.
she made all the food from scratch probably too, right? I mean, we think about now when a lot of our meals, you know, we go and we buy the spaghetti already made and the sauces in a jar and it's good. You know, that's a homemade
that
meal. But
wasn't the
back
way
then
it
it wasn't, people were making their own bread, making their own everything.
Yeah, no, she did not make her own bread, but I don't remember that we had much.
But it wasn't a pre-made meal ever. I mean, it was all, you bought all staple items and...
That's right. You made your spaghetti sauce, yeah.
Williamsport had a lot of trains then too. I imagine you would hear the trains going and the whistles. Like,
Yeah.
So what age did you end up moving to Tioga County then? How much?
Oh, well, I did become a teacher, and my first teaching job was in Selinsgrove. And while I was there was this young man that was in the same church I was in, and I took a liking to him. He took a liking to me. That was good. And so he went off to law school. I stayed in Selinsgrove and kept teaching, and then we got married, and he was still in law school, so I had to move to Philadelphia, and we lived in an attic.
Intentionally?
Yeah, well, that's all that we had money for. And then Rudy graduated,
Yep.
and then he said that he thought he would like to practice in it, be a small town lawyer.
So at this point, you're married to Rudy, your husband, and you wanted to be a small town lawyer.
He didn't want to be a Philadelphia lawyer.
Why did he want to be a small town lawyer? He just...
He
You
wanted
don't know.
because I think he wanted to help people.
So, yep.
Then we were back up here. We lived first in Marsh Creek.
Were we talking 60s? 19... Yeah, somewhere
We
there.
were married in 1964.
And what do you remember about Marsh Creek then? What were your first impressions?
Oh, I loved it.
It wasn't Williamsport.
No, but I really was, living in an attic. Well, first of all, when I was young, I have to backtrack here because what I did was I went to Girl Scout camp, Camp Lycurgus in Loyalsock Creek. And I went there when I was a brownie, which is 7 years old. I went just for a week, and then it progressed and progressed and progressed. And I went there until I was married when I was 26. So I went there every summer. That was my job. I became head of the waterfront, and it was basically a swimming camp. I mean, swimming was a big thing at that camp. Loved it. We had such good times. And I could do a program on Camp Lycurgus, actually. But
The camp's still around? I'd love probably to hear the history of that, or it's not there anymore.
no, it's not.
Yeah.
The floods took it away. Anyway, so when I got married, I could cook outside. I can still cook a meal
Yeah.
outside, but I had a lot of trouble cooking meals inside.
That wasn't your style?
So I had to. So we lived in this third floor apartment, walk up, third floor. It was in a house. And my first summer there, I cooked outside on a little hibachi.
Yeah,
I cooked our
because that was what you used to...
I cooked our meals out there. My husband kind of thought that was a little weird, but anyway, we could eat what we could eat because we were really pretty poor. And so then he said, I think we'll go up to Wellsboro. And so we did. And then we came up to Wellsboro. Okay, does this all make sense?
Yep, now I got you.
And we were in Marsh Creek. I loved Marsh Creek. I loved just being in the country. I loved not being in Philadelphia traffic. I lived in a home, a little house, but it was wonderful.
Yeah.
I was married. First year being married, I I loved it.
Exciting times. And did you have an apartment or a house at that
We
point?
had a house.
Yeah. So you bought a house. You bought right into the community at that.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And it was out in Marsh Creek. And one of our cars, we bought an old Land Rover, with the big tire on the front.
Mm-hmm. Okay, like you're going on an African safari here.
And we had 7 people could fit in it. And we drove it all over, going up Asif, up the mountain, all over the place. It was great. And I had to drive that to school. I taught at the junior high school.
In Wellsboro?
Yes. Had kids in my class like Tommy Walrath and
Yep. Okay.
yeah.
Hi, Tom.
Yes.
So what do we know about Tom in school? Did he get paddled?
No, he didn't get paddled, but he was something. Yeah. Oh my goodness. And he still calls me Mrs. Van der Hiel when he sees me.
Yeah.
I had Eric Coolidge was one of my students too, and
Did he get paddled?
No, but I have a very good history with Eric because, of course, he lived on a farm, and I went out there, and he had horses, Appaloosa horses, and so I said, "Okay, I'll help you with the milking if you then will help me saddle up and ride one of the horses," which he did.
Worked out.
That horse became my first horse. We didn't have any place for it down in Marsh Creek, but so I became really quite close to that family.
Well, they came here probably
wonderful.
right behind you in their canoe because the Coolidges, I think, have been here almost as long as.
Yeah, they have been here a long time. And wonderful.
What was Marsh Creek like then? Was there farming going on around that area?
Yeah. There was a big farm down there, right close to where we were. Right across the street from the road from where we lived was the Marsh Creek Elementary School. They weren't using it as an elementary school at that point, but it had been.
I'll have to do a little research on this one.
Yeah.
Where'd you go to get your groceries? Into Wellsboro at the time?
Wellsboro.
Yeah.
Every Friday night we'd go in and buy our groceries. But my husband, it turned out, ended up in many cases being paid by eggs or, whatever, however this worked. Sometimes people couldn't pay for.
Hear that, Tom Walrath? I'm going to pay you in eggs.
I don't know.
I'm just kidding.
Dear Tom Walrath.
He's got a good sense of humor, so we're good.
Oh my gosh, he does, doesn't he?
Was he funny as a kid like that?
Yeah. I remember when they were introducing themselves, and he stood up and he said, "My name is Thomas Aloysius Walrath III. And my dad is a lawyer," or something like this. And I stood there and I said, "Well, good for you." And my name is Mary Lynn Van der Hiel, and my husband is a lawyer.
So what did you do in Wellsboro? Do you have any memories of things in Wellsboro then? Places that aren't there now? Restaurants? Anything like that?
Well, there are a lot more restaurants now than
People didn't go out to eat. I mean, going out to eat's a fairly modern thing to go on a regular basis in the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah. I remember the hotel. The hotel was a big thing.
By the hotel you're talking about?
Ben Wells.
Because there was the other hotel in the corner that burned down, and it's the Lamplighter.
Yes, and it burned down. Yeah. I think that's where my great uncles went to get drunk. To fight.
Well, in the real old days, the court was in Wellsboro, and if you took a horse over, people had to stay during the trial because you couldn't go back to Mansfield or Liberty and then come back the next day. So after court closed, I've reading the early history of Wellsboro back in the early 1800s and into that, through the 1800s, the taverns were packed.
Yeah, right.
Because not really a vacation, but you had no choice. So
yeah.
And your family was there.
Probably they were. Yes, they probably were in court. That's probably where I get some of my wildness. Yeah.
Okay. You don't seem like a wild person, but
well,
staying out of trouble, wild person. But yeah.
Yeah.
So your husband eventually became the DA of Tioga County, if I remember my history right.
Right. Well, we're in Wellsboro, and then we moved. He thought he would come over here with a lawyer by the name of Robert Farr. Mm-hmm. And so I was really very sad when we moved from Wellsboro over here.
Over here is outside of Mansfield if you're just tuning in.
Yeah. Well, so we moved here. We moved on Elmira Street in a house there and lived there forever. And then I retired. I was a teacher all the time. And then we had all these kids that I told you about that came into our home.
We didn't talk about on the radio, but your husband helped out wayward kids, right? That basically gave them one more chance to come stay at your place. And you told me you had 13 kids at one time staying with you. You just donated your time other than bring a bed and we'll take care of them.
Yeah. You know, we talk about the families out in the canyon, out in Thumptown that have 12 kids, you know.
Yeah.
Or think about the Amish who have all those kids. It works out if you don't lose your wits about you.
If you don't lose your mind, it's great.
Right. You know, you have the older kids that take care of the younger ones.
Yep, and the clothes gets handed right down the line. The youngest kids.
Yeah, and you have to teach. I didn't have these kids, so you'd have a lot of kids that were about the same age. And so they all had chores, which probably they never had to do that before. You know, they had to learn.
Yeah, they need nothing structured in their life before.
No, boys, girls, whatever. They had to set the table. They had to do their own wash. They had to do it on a certain day because you couldn't be doing.
They'll put it off forever if you don't have a schedule.
13 kids doing a wash at the same time. Oh my gosh. So they'd have to do washing. If they didn't do their washing, then don't come to me and tell me you don't have a clean pair of jeans.
Natural consequence, we call that.
Wear a dirty pair of jeans, you know, and try to make a deal with one of the other kids about your wash, you know. So, and we did go out and we started this whole thing about tough love. You know, I did care about all those kids, and we did really work with them. We'd sit around our dining room table was about as big as this room, and we would sit around there, and they would do their homework.
And you were telling me before we went on that I asked you, this made a major difference in a lot of these kids. I mean, a lot of the kids bought into this. Instead of going to juvenile detention center, wherever they would have gone, they learned some life skills and decided to
go on.
Yeah.
But I decided while I was sitting there trying to figure out the darn math. Anyway, I decided, you know, there should be a school for these kids because really, I didn't like school and it was really, really hard for me. And I thought that there should be a school, like an alternative place for these kids. So I went about getting that school.
You did that?
Yeah. And that's how the school...
You're amazing. Which school? What's the school? Where was the school? Tell me.
In Blossburg. It was the alternative program for hard-to-handle kids.
Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
Wayward youth, I think was the term before that.
Yeah. And, of course, there were treatment centers there. You probably know.
Was this through Laurel? You mean like the Blossburg Hospital?
Blossburg.
Okay.
At the hospital.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And you helped to set that up?
I didn't set that program up. I was called in there to work as a substitute teacher.
Yes, and you certainly would have the skills after your life experience. So
then we started the school, the alternative. It was called the alternative school, and oh my gosh, it was really the best. I mean, I had quite a bit. I taught in Philadelphia, and I taught in Wellsboro, and I taught in Selinsgrove. I had quite a bit of teaching experience, but it was the teaching that being the head of that school was the best experience I think that I ever had working with those kids. And, you know, these were hard to handle kids. Like,
well, if you use traditional means, they were.
You and me,
yeah.
You know? Yeah. Oh, brother. Yeah, right. Digging our way out of the backyard.
Yeah, escaping through a tunnel out of your yard.
Being bad. Oh, my word. And we did so much. And we taught them. You had to teach them. We had teachers. I mean, we had regular teachers.
How big was this school? A couple of classrooms big?
Oh, yeah. It was 6 classrooms. And
where was the school? Where was this?
At the old hospital.
Okay. It was within there. Yeah. You got a lot of friends there, by the way, on your phone.
So you have the hospital.
Yeah. So it's right in there. Yeah.
And you had the treatment centers at that end. And then the school was down here at this lower end.
Yeah.
If you drive up past there. And then you can see it kind of looks like a big store room at the one end. And that was the gym. We had built the gym for the kids to have gym class.
Yeah. And did that program end before the hospital closed, or did it stay, do you know?
I think what happened, I was there for 21 years, and then my husband said, I think that I'm getting ready to retire. And I said, well, okay. And so I decided that maybe I would retire. So I retired first. We had been to Canada every summer. And so we bought a home in Canada. And he said, I think I'll go to Canada. I said, well, okay, so we're going to Canada. So
make up your mind. Selinsgrove, Philadelphia. Let's live in an attic. Let's go to South Williamsport. Let's go to Wellsboro. Let's go to Canada.
Yeah. So I retired and then he retired. So the school stayed open, I think, maybe 2 years after I retired. And then there was an issue with money. So Southern Tioga School District closed the alternative school. And I have been asked by some teachers to open a school like that again. Yeah, right.
It's needed. It's always needed.
I mean, there are a lot of kids with a lot of problems. And
Takes a special person to be able to work and communicate with a kid like that, to reach them and to help them.
well, maybe it's
And not to give up on them, too.
My teachers were so fantastic. And every teacher had a counselor working with them. Who was trained if a kid decided to
Somehow we went backwards in this world, it sounds like. It sounds like we got something good going.
throw a fit.
Yeah.
The counselor would know what to do with the kid immediately. And there were 6 counselors there, so the kid really threw a fit. And I kind of oversaw the whole thing. We had a catering service. We made meals for the rest of the people. They would come down and they would pay for their meals, like a salad or soup or whatever the kids had made that day.
Yeah.
And then that money would go into the summer program, actually.
So then your husband became DA, or did I go past that?
No, he's already been
Okay, they're DA, that's right. So,
and then all of a sudden, I have to say to you, all of a sudden he said one day, came home from work and said, I think I'll go to seminary. And I said, oh, well, I see. And how are you going to do that? I don't know if you realize this, but there are 5 kids here, 2 dogs and me, and you're going to seminary? How are you going to do this? I mean, I'm not working right now.
not like, how are you going to do this? Not him.
So he said, I have it all planned. And he did. He went to Rochester, Colgate, and by darn, he went. He graduated second in his class, I think, and still kept us law practice,
Yeah.
still supported us. The kids were still in school. I was still there.
Yeah.
And then I said, I think I'll start a school. So I was working, then he became a priest, so he was a minister, had his law office was over where our municipal buildings are right now. Up above that were his law offices.
On Main Street, Mansfield.
On Main
Yep.
Street, yep.
Yep.
And he was hired by the Episcopal Church here, so he had these 2 jobs.
2 different hats.
2 different laws.
Yep.
God's law, man's law, as he said.
The Bible and the law books. Yep.
And so, and then he said, I think I'll retire. I said, I think I'll retire.
Yep.
And then we moved to Canada. And then we were in Canada for 20-some years. And I thought we were going to travel and do all this wonderful stuff that retired people that can do that could do. And then the bishop called. And then he had 6 churches and worked in Muskoka. The hardest job I have ever had is being a priest's wife. That's a hard job.
Because you never know what the demands are going to be. It's like almost a military wife, know?
Well, I mean, you have to be kind of good,
Oh, you're being watched too, I guess, right? Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I was saying you're a teacher too.
That's a whole story by itself. There were so many. I was on a dog sled team. There were so many stories in Canada. That was wonderful.
Yeah. And your husband unfortunately passed away.
2019.
2019 after how many years you were married?
55.
55 years. Wow. Both of you, incredible.
I don't know if we're incredible. But
Well, in my book, you are.
thank you. Thank you.
Maybe not in your modest book, but you are. Both of you.
It has been. And I hope it will still stay. I mean, I hope I'll still be able to do things. I kind of am slowing down a little bit, but I hope I can still do things.
Yeah.
I have
Keep your mind busy and your
granddaughters that are doing things, and
You told me that family helps you out here a lot, and you're still out and about, and that's great.
yeah.
Well, 86 years young. Thank you for joining us, Lynn Van der Hiel, on Saturday with Seniors. Brought to you by Eisenhower's Tao County Harley Davidson. Anything last you want to just wrap up with that we missed or anything? Or
I don't think so.
I think we covered a lot. Thank you for letting me into your home. And
It's been really great. Thank you. It's been fun.